Dr. Elena Vasquez sat at her computer screen at 3 in the morning. Empty coffee cups covered her desk. She had been staring at the same data for 6 hours straight. Something was very wrong with the ocean floor near the Mariana Trench. Elena worked at the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center in Hawaii. For 12 years, she had studied earthquakes and ocean waves. She knew how to read the signs that warned of danger. But what she saw on her screen tonight was unlike anything she had ever seen before. The numbers did not make sense. Deep under the Pacific Ocean, the ground was moving in ways that should not be possible. Massive amounts of hot rock were pushing up from the center of the Earth. The pressure was building to dangerous levels. Elena rubbed her tired eyes and looked at the data again. She hoped she was making a mistake, but the numbers remained the same. Every measurement pointed to the same terrible conclusion. A huge underwater volcano was about to explode. She picked up her phone and called her supervisor, Dr. Marcus Webb. The phone rang 5 times before he answered. "Elena, do you know what time it is?" Dr. Webb sounded annoyed. "Marcus, you need to see this data right now. We have a serious problem. It can wait until morning." "No, it cannot wait. The Mariana Trench is showing signs of a massive eruption. We could be looking at the biggest tsunami in recorded history." There was silence on the other end of the phone. Then Dr. Webb sighed heavily. "Send me the data. I will look at it first thing in the morning." "Marcus, you do not understand. This could happen in days, maybe weeks. We need to warn people now. Elena, just send me the data. Good night." The phone went dead. Elena stared at the phone in her hand. She could not believe Dr. Webb was not taking this seriously. Elena had discovered something that could save millions of lives. The underwater volcano she was tracking was not just any volcano. It was connected to a network of fault lines that stretched across the entire Pacific Ocean. If it erupted with the force her data suggested, it would create waves over 100 feet tall. These waves would race across the Pacific at the speed of a jet plane. They would hit Japan first, then the Philippines, then Hawaii, and finally the west coast of America. Cities like Tokyo, Manila, Honolulu, Los Angeles, and San Francisco would be completely destroyed. Elena had seen smaller tsunamis before. In 2004, a tsunami in the Indian Ocean killed over 200,000 people. The waves from that disaster were only 30 feet tall in most places. The waves she was predicting would be 3 times bigger. She thought about her daughter Sophia, who lived in San Diego. She thought about her brother Carlos in Los Angeles. She thought about the millions of people who lived near the Pacific Ocean, who had no idea what was coming. Elena spent the rest of the night checking her calculations. She ran the data through different computer programs. She compared her readings with historical records. Every test gave her the same result. A disaster was coming, and it was going to be bigger than anything humans had ever experienced. At 7 in the morning, Elena walked to Dr. Webb's office. She carried a thick folder full of charts and graphs. She knocked on his door and waited. "Come in," Dr. Webb called. Elena entered the office. Dr. Webb was drinking coffee and reading emails. He did not look up when she sat down. "I looked at your data," he said without raising his eyes from his computer. "It is interesting, but not conclusive." "What do you mean, not conclusive?" Elena asked. "The magma chamber is expanding at an incredible rate. The pressure readings are off the charts. All the indicators point to an imminent eruption." Dr. Webb finally looked at her. "Elena, you have been working too hard. These kinds of readings happen all the time. The Earth is always moving. It does not mean a disaster is coming." Elena opened her folder and spread the papers across his desk. "Look at these temperature readings. The water around the trench has heated up by 15 degrees in the past month. Look at these seismic measurements. We are recording micro-earthquakes every few minutes." Dr. Webb glanced at the papers but did not study them carefully. "Elena, I've been doing this job for 25 years. I have seen false alarms before. The computer models are not always right." "This is not a false alarm," Elena said, her voice rising. "I have triple-checked everything. We need to issue a warning immediately. We cannot issue warnings based on incomplete data. Do you know what would happen if we told the world that a mega tsunami was coming and nothing happened? We would lose all credibility. No one would trust us again." Elena felt her frustration growing. "And what happens if we say nothing and millions of people die?" Dr. Webb leaned back in his chair. "Elena, I understand you are concerned, but we follow procedures here. We need more data before we can make any announcements." "How much more data do you need?" The volcano is going to erupt. When it does, we will have maybe 6 hours to warn people before the waves hit Japan. That is not enough time. I am sorry, Elena, but the answer is no. Keep monitoring the situation. But do not contact any outside agencies. That is an order. Elena could not believe what she was hearing. She gathered her papers and stood up. You are making a terrible mistake. I am protecting this organization and the people we serve. False alarms cause panic. Panic kills people too. Elena left Dr. Webb's office feeling defeated. She walked back to her laboratory and sat down at her computer. The data was still there, still showing the same terrifying picture. She thought about Dr. Webb's words. He was worried about false alarms, but Elena knew this was not false. She had spent her entire career studying these patterns. She understood them better than anyone. Elena decided to try a different approach. She called Dr. Sarah Kim, a respected seismologist at the University of California. Dr. Kim had written several papers about underwater volcanoes. Sarah, this is Elena Vasquez from the Pacific Warning Center. I need you to look at some data for me. Of course, Elena, what do you have? Elena explained what she had discovered. She sent Dr. Kim all of her measurements and calculations. They spent 2 hours on the phone going through every detail. Elena, Dr. Kim said finally, this data is absolutely terrifying. If your calculations are correct, we are looking at a catastrophe beyond imagination. So you agree with my analysis? I do. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Elena told Dr. Kim about her conversation with Dr. Webb. Dr. Kim was quiet for a long moment. Elena, you have discovered something that could save millions of lives, but you work in a system that is more concerned with avoiding embarrassment than preventing disasters. You have a choice to make. Elena knew Dr. Kim was right. She could follow orders and stay quiet, or she could find a way to warn the world herself. The lives of millions of people hung in the balance. That night, Elena sat in her small apartment overlooking Pearl Harbor. She thought about her responsibility as a scientist. She had taken an oath to use her knowledge to protect people, but she also had a duty to obey her superiors. Elena made her decision. She would find a way to warn the world, even if it cost her everything. The next morning, Elena arrived at work to find Dr. Webb waiting in her laboratory. He was not alone. A man in an expensive suit stood beside him holding a briefcase. Elena, this is Mr. Richard Hayes from the Department of Homeland Security, Dr. Webb said. His voice sounded strained. Mr. Hayes stepped forward and extended his hand. Elena shook it, feeling confused and worried. Dr. Vasquez, we need to talk about the data you have been collecting, Mr. Hayes said. His smile looked fake. There are some concerns about the conclusions you have reached. What kind of concerns? Elena asked. National security concerns. Your research could cause unnecessary panic if it becomes public. We need to make sure this information is handled properly. Elena looked at Dr. Webb. He would not meet her eyes. What is this really about? Mr. Hayes opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. Dr. Vasquez, your research involves areas of the ocean that are important to our national defense. Some of your findings could compromise sensitive operations. I am studying volcanic activity. How does that compromise anything? That information is classified, Mr. Hayes replied. What I can tell you is that your research needs to be reviewed by our security team before any warnings can be issued. Elena felt her heart sink. How long will that review take? Several months, possibly longer. We do not have several months. People need to be warned now. Mr. Hayes closed his briefcase and looked directly at Elena. Dr. Vasquez, I am ordering you to stop all research related to the Mariana Trench. You are not to share your data with anyone outside this facility. You are not to contact any media outlets or foreign governments. Is that understood? Elena stared at him in disbelief. You cannot stop me from doing my job. People have a right to know about this danger. Actually, we can, Mr. Hayes said. Under the National Defense Authorization Act, we have the authority to classify any research that could impact national security. Your research is now classified. Dr. Webb finally spoke up. Elena, I am sorry. This decision came from above my level. There is nothing I can do. Elena felt trapped. She thought about the millions of people who lived near the Pacific Ocean. They were going about their daily lives, completely unaware of the disaster that was building beneath the waves. This is wrong, Elena said. You are condemning innocent people to death. We are protecting the greater good, Mr. Hayes replied. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. After Mr. Hayes left, Elena sat alone in her laboratory. She looked at her computer screen, but the data had been locked. She could not access any of her research files. A message appeared on her screen. Access denied, contact system administrator. Dr. Webb returned to her laboratory an hour later. He looked uncomfortable and avoided eye contact. Elena, there have been some changes to your assignment, he said. You are being transferred to the remote monitoring station on Midway Island. You leave tomorrow. Midway Island? That is in the middle of nowhere. There is nothing to monitor there. There are always things to monitor. Consider it a temporary assignment. Elena knew this was not temporary. They were sending her away to keep her quiet. Midway Island was a tiny speck of land in the Pacific Ocean, over 1,000 miles from Hawaii. The monitoring station there had only basic equipment and no communication with the outside world except for emergency calls. What about my research? Your research will be continued by other team members. What other team members? I am the only one who understands this data. Dr. Webb shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Peterson will take over your work. Elena almost laughed. Dr. Peterson was close to retirement and had not done original research in years. He spent most of his time playing computer games and counting down the days until his pension started. Dr. Peterson does not even know how to use the new analysis software. He will learn. That evening, Elena went home and tried to call Dr. Sarah Kim at the University of California. The call would not go through. She tried calling from her cell phone but got the same result. She realized her phone calls were being blocked. Elena drove to a payphone at a gas station. She called Dr. Kim's office, but a secretary answered and said Dr. Kim was not available. Elena asked when she could call back. Dr. Kim is on sabbatical, the secretary said. She will not be taking any calls for the next 6 months. Elena knew this was a lie. She had spoken to Dr. Kim just 2 days ago, and there had been no mention of a sabbatical. The next morning, Elena packed her bags and prepared to leave for Midway Island. As she was loading her car, her neighbor Mrs. Chen came over to say goodbye. I heard you are going away for work, Mrs. Chen said. When will you be back? I do not know, Elena replied honestly. Mrs. Chen looked concerned. Is everything okay? You look worried. Elena wanted to tell Mrs. Chen everything. She wanted to warn her to stay away from the coast. But she knew that would only put Mrs. Chen in danger and would not help anyone else. Just take care of yourself, Elena said, and maybe think about visiting your sister in Colorado for a while. Mrs. Chen looked confused but nodded. Okay, dear. You take care too. The flight to Midway Island took 6 hours. Elena was the only passenger on the small government plane. She spent the flight looking out the window at the endless blue ocean below. Somewhere beneath those calm waters, a monster was growing. The monitoring station on Midway Island was even smaller than Elena had expected. It consisted of 3 buildings and 2 other staff members. Tom and Janet were both close to retirement and seemed happy to have an easy assignment, far from the stress of the main office. Nothing much happens here, Tom told Elena on her first day. We check the instruments twice a day and send a report to Hawaii once a week. Most of the time we just watch movies and play cards. Elena was given a tiny office with an old computer that could barely run basic programs. The seismic monitoring equipment was 20 years out of date. She had no access to the real-time data she needed to track the volcanic activity. For the first week, Elena tried to work with the limited equipment available. She sent requests to headquarters asking for better instruments and faster internet access. Her requests were denied due to budget constraints. Elena realized she was being kept in a cage. They had not fired her because that would have raised questions. Instead, they had put her in a place where she could not do any harm to their cover-up. But Elena was not ready to give up. Late at night, when Tom and Janet were asleep, she tried to access the internet using the station's emergency communication system. The connection was slow and unreliable, but she managed to reach a few websites. Elena discovered that she was not the only scientist who had been silenced. Several other researchers who had been studying unusual seismic activity in the Pacific had suddenly disappeared from public view. Some had been transferred to remote locations like herself. Others had been fired for budget reasons. A few had simply stopped publishing their research without explanation. Elena also found news reports about unusual animal behavior along the Pacific coast. Whales and dolphins were swimming away from their normal feeding areas. Fish populations were moving to deeper waters. Dogs and cats in coastal cities were acting nervous and restless. But these reports were buried in local newspapers and scientific journals. The major news networks were not covering these stories. It seemed like someone was working very hard to keep this information from reaching the public. Elena realized the cover-up was bigger than she had thought. This was not just about her research or her data. There was a coordinated effort to hide the truth from millions of people. She thought about her daughter Sophia in San Diego and her brother Carlos in Los Angeles. They had no idea that their lives were in danger. They were going to work every day making plans for the future, completely unaware that a wall of water might soon wash their world away. Elena made a decision. She could not contact the media or warn government officials, but there were other ways to get information to people. She just had to be very careful about how she did it. Late that night, Elena began writing an email to her daughter. She could not tell Sophia directly about the volcanic threat, but she could suggest that Sophia might want to visit her grandmother in Denver for a while. She could hint that it might be good to take a vacation away from the coast. It was not much, but it was a start. Elena was going to find a way to warn people, even if she had to do it one person at a time. 3 weeks passed on Midway Island. Elena felt like she was going crazy. Every day that went by was another day closer to disaster. She knew the volcanic pressure was still building beneath the ocean floor, but she had no way to monitor it from her tiny outpost. Elena had managed to send careful messages to her family and a few close friends, suggesting they might want to take vacations away from the coast. But she knew this was not enough. Millions of people needed to be warned. On a Thursday morning, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She waited until Tom and Janet went fishing. Then she accessed the emergency communication system. Instead of calling for help, she called a reporter at CNN. "This is Lisa Parker, CNN News," a voice answered. Elena's heart pounded. "Ms. Parker, my name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I am a seismologist with the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center. I have critical information about a massive threat to public safety." There was a pause. "What kind of threat?" "An underwater volcano in the Pacific is about to erupt. It will create the largest tsunami in recorded history. Millions of people could die if they are not warned. Dr. Vasquez, can you provide documentation to support these claims? I have been isolated and my data has been classified. But I can give you the details of what I discovered. You can verify it with other scientists." Elena spent the next hour explaining her findings to Lisa Parker. She described the volcanic activity, the pressure readings, and the potential impact of the tsunami. She also told the reporter about how she had been silenced and sent away. "This is a serious accusation," Lisa Parker said. "If what you are saying is true, why has no official warning been issued?" "Because powerful people are more concerned with avoiding panic than saving lives. They think they can control the situation, but they are wrong. Dr. Vasquez, I need to verify this information with other sources. Can you give me the names of other scientists who can confirm your findings?" Elena gave Lisa Parker the names of Dr. Sarah Kim and several other researchers who had studied similar data. She also provided technical details that could be checked independently. "I will look into this and get back to you," Lisa Parker said. "How can I reach you?" Elena realized she had made a mistake. She could not give the reporter her real contact information without exposing herself. "I will call you back in 2 days," she said, and hung up. Elena spent the next 48 hours in a state of nervous excitement. She had finally taken action. Someone in the media was investigating her claims. Maybe the truth would finally come out. When Elena called CNN back, a different person answered the phone. "I'm looking for Lisa Parker," Elena said. "Ms. Parker is no longer with CNN," the voice replied. "She has taken a position with another company." Elena felt her heart sink. "What other company?" "I am not authorized to give out that information." Elena tried calling other news networks. She contacted ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox News. Each time she was told that they would look into her claims and get back to her, but none of them ever called back. Elena realized that the same forces that had silenced her were also silencing the media. Somehow her story was being buried before it could reach the public. Desperate, Elena decided to try a different approach. She created an anonymous email account and began contacting local emergency management agencies directly. She sent detailed warnings to officials in Japan, the Philippines, Hawaii, California, Oregon, and Washington. The responses she received were disappointing. Most agencies replied with form letters thanking her for her concern, but explaining that they could only act on official warnings from recognized authorities. A few agencies said they would look into the matter, but Elena never heard back from them. One agency in Japan did take her seriously. A man named Hiroshi Tanaka from the Japan Meteorological Agency called the number Elena had provided. "Dr. Vasquez, we have reviewed your information," Mr. Tanaka said in careful English. "Our scientists are concerned about your findings. However, we have received official assurances from the United States government that there is no immediate threat." "Those assurances are wrong," Elena said. "The U.S. government is covering up the truth. Dr. Vasquez, we want to believe you, but we cannot issue warnings that contradict official statements from our allies. It would cause a diplomatic crisis." Elena understood Mr. Tanaka's position, but she felt frustrated. Even when people believed her, they were afraid to act without official approval. Elena decided to try social media. She created fake accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. She began posting warnings about the volcanic threat, using scientific language and data to make her posts credible. At first, her posts were ignored, but slowly a few people began to share them. Scientists and disaster preparedness experts started discussing her warnings online. Elena felt hopeful that the truth was finally spreading, but her hope was short-lived. Within a week, all of her social media accounts were suspended for spreading false information. Her posts were removed and marked as fake news. Anyone who tried to share her warnings received notices that the content had been fact-checked and found to be inaccurate. Elena realized that the cover-up reached into every corner of the media landscape. Whoever was behind this had the power to silence her no matter what platform she used. Feeling desperate, Elena decided to take an enormous risk. She used the emergency communication system to contact foreign governments directly. She called the Chinese embassy, the Russian consulate, and the European Union offices. Each time she was transferred from person to person before finally reaching someone who would listen to her. But the conversations always ended the same way. The officials would thank her for the information and promise to look into it, but they would not take any action without verification from U.S. authorities. Elena's secret communications did not stay secret for long. 2 days after her calls to foreign governments, Elena received a visit that terrified her. A military helicopter landed on Midway Island without warning. 3 men in uniform stepped out and walked directly to Elena's office. Tom and Janet watched nervously from their building but did not interfere. "Dr. Vasquez, I am Colonel James Morrison from U.S. Pacific Command," the lead man said. "We need to talk." Elena's hands shook as she invited the men into her office. She knew she was in serious trouble. "Dr. Vasquez, you have been making unauthorized communications that violate your security clearance," Colonel Morrison said. "This is a federal crime." "I am trying to save lives," Elena replied. "People have a right to know about this danger. What people have a right to is accurate information from qualified authorities. Your theories have been reviewed by experts and found to be flawed." "What experts? Dr. Peterson? He does not even understand the data." Colonel Morrison opened a folder and placed several documents on Elena's desk. "These are statements from leading seismologists at universities across the country. They all agree that your conclusions are incorrect." Elena looked at the documents. She recognized some of the names, but the statements all sounded the same. They used almost identical language to dismiss her findings as speculative and unsupported by evidence. "These statements are fake," Elena said. "I know some of these scientists personally. They would never write things like this without seeing my actual data. Dr. Vasquez, you are in serious legal trouble. However, we are prepared to offer you a deal. If you sign an agreement to stop all communications about this subject, we will not press criminal charges." Colonel Morrison placed another document in front of Elena. It was a non-disclosure agreement that would legally prevent her from discussing her research for the rest of her life. "What if I refuse to sign? Then you will be arrested for violating the Espionage Act. You could spend the rest of your life in prison." Elena stared at the document. She thought about her daughter Sophia and her brother Carlos. If she went to prison, she would never see them again. But if she signed the agreement, they might die in the tsunami she was trying to prevent. "I need time to think about this," Elena said. You have until tomorrow morning, Colonel Morrison replied. We will return for your answer. That night, Elena could not sleep. She walked along the beach at Midway Island looking out at the dark ocean. Somewhere beneath those waters, the volcanic pressure was building toward an explosion that would change the world. Elena had tried everything she could think of to warn people. She had contacted the media, government agencies, foreign officials, and used social media. Every avenue had been blocked. The truth was being suppressed by forces more powerful than she had ever imagined. But Elena was not ready to give up. She had one more idea, one last desperate measure that might work. It would require her to sacrifice everything, but it might be the only way to save millions of lives. Elena spent the rest of the night planning her final attempt to warn the world. She knew it would probably cost her freedom and maybe even her life. But she also knew she could not live with herself if she did nothing while innocent people died. Tomorrow she would make her choice. Elena did not sign the agreement. When Colonel Morrison returned the next morning, she looked him straight in the eye and refused. Dr. Vasquez, you're making a serious mistake, he said. The mistake would be staying silent while millions of people are in danger, Elena replied. Colonel Morrison nodded to his men. Dr. Elena Vasquez, you are under arrest for violating the Espionage Act and threatening national security. They handcuffed Elena and put her on the helicopter. As Midway Island disappeared below them, Elena wondered if she would ever see freedom again. But Elena had made one final preparation before her arrest. The night before, she had used the emergency communication system to send a coded message to an old friend from college. Dr. Michael Rodriguez worked at a small earthquake research center in Guatemala. He was independent, trustworthy, and far from the reach of U.S. authorities. Elena's message was hidden inside what looked like a routine scientific inquiry about volcanic activity in Central America. But Michael understood the real meaning. Elena was asking for help and she was in serious trouble. 3 days later, Elena sat in a federal detention center in Honolulu. She had been charged with espionage and was being held without bail. Her lawyer, a young public defender named Janet Lee, explained that the charges were very serious. Dr. Vasquez, the government claims you shared classified information with foreign agents, Janet said. If convicted, you could face life in prison. I was trying to warn people about a natural disaster. How is that espionage? They say your research involves sensitive military operations in the Pacific. They claim that revealing the locations of underwater monitoring equipment could help enemy forces. Elena knew this was nonsense. Her research had nothing to do with military equipment. But she also knew that challenging the government would be almost impossible. While Elena sat in jail, Dr. Michael Rodriguez was busy in Guatemala. He had decoded Elena's message and understood what she was asking him to do. Michael began reaching out to independent scientists around the world, sharing Elena's data and asking for their opinions. Michael contacted Dr. Yuki Sato, a seismologist in South Korea, who studied underwater earthquakes. He sent Elena's data to Dr. Maria Santos, a volcanologist in Chile who specialized in Pacific Ring of Fire activity. He also reached out to Dr. James Chen, an oceanographer in New Zealand who had published papers about mega tsunamis. These scientists were not connected to government agencies or large universities that might be influenced by political pressure. They worked independently and cared more about the truth than about protecting their careers. Within a week, Michael had responses from all of them. Every scientist who reviewed Elena's data came to the same conclusion. A massive underwater eruption was imminent, and it would create devastating tsunamis across the Pacific. Dr. Yuki Sato was the first to go public. She held a press conference in Seoul and announced that Korean scientists had detected dangerous volcanic activity in the Pacific Ocean. She called for immediate evacuation of coastal areas and criticized the United States for failing to issue warnings. The Korean government initially supported Dr. Sato, but within 24 hours they changed their position. After a phone call from the U.S. State Department, Korean officials announced that Dr. Sato's claims were unverified and that there was no immediate threat. Dr. Sato found herself in the same position as Elena. Her research funding was cut, and she was told to stop making public statements about the volcanic threat. But Dr. Sato was stubborn. She continued speaking out, even when her university threatened to fire her. Dr. Maria Santos in Chile tried a different approach. Instead of holding press conferences, she began sharing Elena's data through underground scientific networks. She contacted researchers at small universities and independent institutions across South America. These scientists began their own research projects, confirming Elena's findings with their own instruments. They discovered that the volcanic activity was not limited to the Mariana Trench. The entire Pacific Ring of Fire was showing signs of increased activity. Dr. Santos organized a secret meeting in Santiago, Chile. 23 scientists from 7 countries attended. They called themselves the Pacific Safety Coalition. Their mission was to warn the world about the coming disaster, even if their own governments tried to stop them. The coalition began using creative methods to spread their message. They created a website that looked like a harmless academic journal, but actually contained detailed warnings about the volcanic threat. They used amateur radio networks to communicate with disaster preparedness groups around the world. Dr. James Chen in New Zealand took the biggest risk. He contacted several journalists who specialized in environmental stories. These reporters were not employed by major news networks, so they were less likely to be silenced by corporate pressure. One of these journalists, Sarah Mitchell from an independent news website called Earth Alert, published a detailed story about Elena's research and the government cover-up. The story included technical data, expert opinions, and evidence of how scientists were being silenced. The story spread quickly through social media and alternative news sites. Within days, millions of people had read about the volcanic threat. Environmental groups and disaster preparedness organizations began demanding answers from government officials, but the response was swift and brutal. Sarah Mitchell's website was hacked and shut down. She received legal threats and death threats. Her funding sources dried up and she was forced to stop publishing. Other independent journalists who tried to cover the story faced similar problems. Their websites were attacked by hackers. Their sources were intimidated. Their advertising sponsors were pressured to withdraw support. Despite these setbacks, the Pacific Safety Coalition continued their work. They realized that traditional media channels were controlled by the same forces that were covering up the volcanic threat, so they developed new ways to communicate. Coalition members began appearing at academic conferences and scientific meetings around the world. They presented their research under titles that sounded harmless but actually contained warnings about the Pacific threat. They embedded coded messages in their presentations that other scientists could understand. Dr. Rodriguez organized a network of amateur radio operators who began broadcasting technical information about volcanic activity. These radio broadcasts reached disaster preparedness groups, emergency responders, and concerned citizens in remote areas that government propaganda could not reach. The coalition also reached out to indigenous communities along the Pacific coast. Many of these communities had ancient knowledge about tsunamis and natural disasters. Their ancestors had survived similar events and passed down warnings through oral traditions. Elder Mary Littlewolf of the Quinault tribe in Washington state became one of the coalition's most important allies. She understood immediately what the scientists were trying to tell her. Her people had stories about giant waves that came from the deep ocean during times when the earth was angry. Elder Littlewolf began organizing evacuation plans for indigenous communities along the Pacific Northwest coast. She contacted other tribal leaders and shared the coalition's warnings. These communities began quietly moving to higher ground, following their ancestral knowledge about tsunami safety. Father Miguel Hernandez, a Catholic priest in coastal Peru, also joined the coalition's efforts. He administered to survivors of the 1960 Chilean tsunami and understood the devastating power of these waves. Father Hernandez began organizing his parishioners to prepare for disaster, telling them that God sometimes sent warnings through scientists. As the coalition's network grew, government authorities became more aggressive in their efforts to stop them. Dr. Sato was arrested in South Korea on charges of spreading false information. Dr. Santos was fired from her university in Chile and faced criminal charges for inciting public panic. But the more the authorities tried to silence the coalition, the more attention they drew to their cause. People began asking why governments were so desperate to suppress information about natural disasters. Conspiracy theories spread online, and some of them were actually true. Elena, still sitting in her jail cell in Honolulu, learned about the coalition's work through her lawyer. Janet Lee had been contacted by Dr. Rodriguez, who was coordinating legal support for arrested scientists. "Dr. Vasquez, you are not alone," Janet told Elena during one of their meetings. "Scientists around the world are confirming your research and working to warn people. Your sacrifice has inspired others to take action." Elena felt a mixture of hope and despair. She was glad that her message was finally reaching people, but she knew time was running out. The volcanic pressure was still building, and the eruption could happen at any moment. "How many people know about the danger?" Elena asked. "The coalition estimates that several million people have received warnings through various channels, but that is only a small fraction of the people who are at risk." Elena realized that even the coalition's best efforts might not be enough. The major population centers along the Pacific coast were still unaware of the threat. The governments and media organizations that could reach the most people were still maintaining their silence. But Elena also knew that the coalition had accomplished something important. Captain Roberto Silva had been fishing the waters off the coast of Japan for 30 years. He had seen storms, earthquakes, and unusual tides, but he had never seen anything like what was happening now. For the past month, the fish had been acting strangely. Schools of tuna that normally stayed in deep water were swimming toward the surface. Dolphins were gathering in large groups and swimming east away from the coast. The water temperature had increased by several degrees, even though it was still winter. "Something is wrong with the ocean," Captain Silva told his crew as they hauled in their nets. "The fish are scared of something." His crew nodded in agreement. They had all noticed the changes. The older fishermen said it reminded them of stories their grandfathers had told about the time. Before the Great Tsunami of 1960, Captain Silva tried to report his observations to the Japanese Fisheries Agency, but they told him that water temperatures naturally fluctuated and that fish behavior was affected by many factors. They showed no interest in investigating further. Similar reports were coming from fishing crews across the Pacific. Captain Maria Fernandez, who fished off the coast of Chile, noticed that seabirds were flying inland and staying there. Captain David Kim in California reported that his sonar was picking up unusual sounds from the deep ocean floor. But these reports were dismissed by authorities as anecdotal observations with no scientific value. Fishermen were told that their concerns were based on superstition rather than fact. Dr. Lisa Park, a marine biologist at the University of Hawaii, was studying whale migration patterns when she noticed something alarming. Humpback whales that normally spent the winter in Hawaiian waters were leaving weeks earlier than usual. They were swimming toward Alaska, far from their normal feeding grounds. Dr. Park published a paper about her observations, but it was buried in an obscure scientific journal that few people read. When she tried to discuss her findings with colleagues, they suggested that climate change was affecting migration patterns and that her observations were not cause for alarm. Meanwhile, pet owners across the Pacific region began reporting strange behavior in their animals. Dogs were whining and pacing restlessly. Cats were hiding under furniture and refusing to come out. Birds were flying in confused circles and refusing to return to their cages. Dr. Jennifer Wong, a veterinarian in San Francisco, saw dozens of pets with anxiety symptoms that had no obvious medical cause. She wondered if the animals were sensing something that humans could not detect. "I have seen nervous pets before earthquakes," Dr. Wong told her colleague, Dr. Steve Martinez, "but I have never seen so many animals affected at the same time across such a wide area." Dr. Martinez dismissed her concerns. "Animals are sensitive to changes in barometric pressure and electromagnetic fields. It could be anything from solar flares to weather patterns." But Dr. Wong was not convinced. She began keeping detailed records of animal behavior reports from veterinary clinics across California, Oregon, and Washington. The pattern was clear. Pets throughout the Pacific Coast region were showing signs of extreme stress. In indigenous communities along the Pacific Coast, elders were reading different signs. Elder Joseph Blackwater of the Maka tribe in Washington state noticed that seabirds were not roosting in their usual places along the cliffs. The tide pools contained fewer sea creatures than normal, and the ones that remained seemed agitated. "The ocean is telling us something," Elder Blackwater told his tribal council. "Our ancestors taught us to listen to these warnings." The Maka tribal government decided to take precautions. They quietly began moving important cultural artifacts to higher ground and discussed evacuation plans with community members. They did not make any public announcements, but they prepared for the possibility of a major tsunami. Similar preparations were taking place in other indigenous communities. The Quinault tribe in Washington, led by Elder Mary Littlewolf, had already begun relocating vulnerable community members after receiving warnings from the Pacific Safety Coalition. In Alaska, the Tlingit people noticed that salmon were not returning to their traditional spawning grounds. Seals and sea otters were coming closer to shore, as if seeking protection from something in the deep ocean. These indigenous communities had oral traditions that stretched back thousands of years. Their stories told of times when the earth shook and great waves came from the sea. The elders recognized the signs and knew what they meant. But when tribal leaders tried to share their concerns with state and federal authorities, they were told that their observations were based on folklore rather than science. Government officials said that modern seismic monitoring systems would detect any real threats long before traditional methods could. Dr. Amanda Foster, a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, was one of the few government scientists who took these reports seriously. She had studied the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami and knew that animals and indigenous peoples often detected early warning signs that scientific instruments missed. Dr. Foster began collecting and analyzing the reports from fishermen, pet owners, and indigenous communities. She created a map showing the geographic distribution of unusual observations and found that they clustered around areas of high seismic activity. When Dr. Foster tried to present her findings to her supervisors, she was told that her research was outside her assigned duties and that she should focus on her regular work. Her report was classified and buried in a government filing system. Dr. Foster was frustrated but not surprised. She had seen how bureaucracy could interfere with scientific research before, but she was shocked when she received a visit from the same Colonel Morrison who had arrested Elena Vasquez. Dr. Foster, we understand you have been collecting reports about animal behavior and indigenous observations, Colonel Morrison said. This information relates to classified research and cannot be shared outside secure channels. I am just documenting unusual patterns that might indicate seismic activity, Dr. Foster replied. This is part of my job as a geologist. Your job is what we tell you it is. You are to stop collecting these reports immediately and turn over all your data to our security team. Dr. Foster realized that the cover-up extended far beyond Elena's research. The government was actively suppressing any information that might alert people to the volcanic threat, even observations from animals and indigenous peoples. But Dr. Foster was not willing to stay silent. She secretly contacted Dr. Rodriguez, who was coordinating the Pacific Safety Coalition's efforts. She provided him with her data about animal behavior and indigenous warnings, adding another piece to the growing picture of impending disaster. The coalition began incorporating this information into their warnings. They created a newsletter called Pacific Watch that was distributed through environmental groups and disaster preparedness networks. The newsletter combined Elena's volcanic data with reports of animal behavior and traditional ecological knowledge from indigenous communities. Pacific Watch reached thousands of people who might not have paid attention to purely scientific warnings. Pet owners began taking their animals' behavior more seriously. Environmental activists started organizing community preparedness meetings. Indigenous communities shared their knowledge with nearby non-native populations. But for every person who received and believed these warnings, there were hundreds more who remained completely unaware of the danger. The major news networks continued to ignore the story. Government agencies maintained their official position that there was no threat. Corporate interests that depended on Pacific trade and tourism worked to suppress any information that might cause economic disruption. The cruise ship industry was particularly active in maintaining the cover-up. Dozens of cruise ships carried thousands of passengers through Pacific waters every day. Any warning about tsunamis would devastate their business. Robert Chen, the CEO of Pacific Paradise Cruises, met privately with government officials to discuss the situation. He was assured that the volcanic threat was being managed and that cruise operations could continue safely. But some cruise ship captains were beginning to have doubts. Captain Sarah Williams had been sailing Pacific routes for 15 years. She had noticed the same changes in marine life that the fishing captains had reported. Whales and dolphins were avoiding the normal cruise ship lanes. The watercolor had changed slightly, suggesting different temperature patterns. Captain Williams tried to discuss her concerns with her company's management, but she was told that her observations were irrelevant and that she should focus on providing passengers with a pleasant vacation experience. Similar pressure was being applied throughout the tourism industry. Hotel owners in Hawaii, California, and other Pacific destinations were told that any public discussion of tsunami threats would damage the local economy and cost thousands of jobs. The fishing industry faced the same pressure. Commercial fishing companies that depended on Pacific waters were told that volcanic activity was a natural phenomenon that posed no immediate threat to their operations, even as the signs of impending disaster became more obvious. Economic and political forces worked to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. Stock markets continued to trade Pacific shipping companies. Real estate developers continued building luxury resorts on Pacific.